It seems I got the word first. Well, I would like just to clarify some things and connect back to some of the points that both Teddy and Juan have raised. First of all, I would like to say there is a difference between urban development and planning processes and gentrification. Gentrification as a word was defined by a sociologist in London in the 60s, and it comes from the word gentry, which means almost aristocrats. So gentrification actually means a restructuring of social condition, basically a social and economic restructuring of a neighborhood. So that's quite different. I think you raised some very important and valid points. How do we actually create these interfaces? How do we work with institutions? I think Juan answered by saying we changed the way we think. I think there has been a series of initiatives in the past 10 years that might look similar to each other. There might be artists, there might be architects. Again, it doesn't matter how they are defined. Why? Why do we need to draw boundaries between? It's actually what works. What are the ways of finding a process can encompass many different disciplines or ways of working from other disciplines. We can learn from it. We might be trained as an architect or an artist. But what is important here is actually how do we find or locate the question is the key aspect. So if we are working with institutions, such as the example you were mentioning, MACBA, there were artistic practices that actually use the cultural institutions in Barcelona that were very much part of commodifying culture, but there were artistic practices that used the space as a wedge to organize completely other types of events. So I think it's really more how do we do it and what kind of processes do we engage in. And just to finish off, and I leave the word to you, I think there is something extremely interesting looking at Tijuana. I have the pleasure, maybe it's a wrong word in this context, but actually I was overwhelmed is rather the right word. I was working in Tijuana 10 years ago, and I was crazy enough to bring a group of students from London when I was teaching at the Bartlett, and which we were driving from Los Angeles down to Tijuana. We worked for a while. After that, I kept in contact with groups that organized hack labs in the playas de Tijuana and so on. And it was really one of the things that I think your work is fantastic, that you have engaged in these local processes. One of the things that perhaps is important here to discuss is also how do we work on a larger context? Because one of the issues in Tijuana and along the border of the US and Mexico is this kind of new emerging urbanities, which is the new political landscape. It's a completely new geography. We have the city of the maquiladoras, the factories that were moved from Southeast Asia to the border of US and Mexico, where actually our Epson cartridges, television, everything gets assembled. So the assembly factories area is like an island, which is closed, and people have to drive by bus into these areas to work. And then we have the old city of Tijuana, the shanty towns, and so on. So what happens along the border is a completely new type of city of globalization. Saskia Sassen writes about Tokyo, New York, you know, the big city. But actually, Tijuana is the real new urban emerging urbanities of globalization. And I think in that context, it is an absolutely adequate question that somebody posed earlier today of there. How do we work? How do we work as planners in that? And I don't have the straight answer, but I think, you know, when you pointed out this kind of viral way of operating, of some phenomena spreading, is very similar to how activists are talking in Barcelona. They actually talk about viruses, how you infect somewhere and that will start to spread. Anyway, enough. But it was just connecting some of the issues that were raised.
Well, I was thinking also about the subject. How can we are all the time looking for answers. We are asking, and me as a planner, how can I do to solve this problem? Me as a professional, how can I do to solve this one? What kind of answer can I can give? Well, one thing we have discovered all these years is that it's not stupid to give an answer, but looking for an answer usually is not useful at all, because there are a lot of answers, as we have seen in the analysis from Teddy, that are already being given. So we are like looking for a special answer that comes from us, and usually we just have to look around and to try to link. Usually it's just to create an environment where the answers that are being already given can grow. So most of the time we are looking for things that are already there, and instead of letting them grow. So we get mad about how can I solve this problem, and sometimes there are like 10 or 15 solutions for the same problem in front of you, but they are already too little. So that was like a point of.
Yes, yes. I wanna take the direction of this discussion towards Stockholm in this context also, and I want to relate also something that Teddy was talking about when it comes to the relation of our profession and the condition that we work in globally, but also I'll point out to the situation that the way I see it, the role of architects in Stockholm, that you mentioned developers. We call them big herrar. The whole system of planning, development, and construction in Stockholm, I think in Sweden, is really dominated by these big herrar or large conglomerate developers, where architectural or architect's role, even though we are presented in kind of black suit positions, we are really small actors, small players right now in proportion to the power exerted by these kind of large often private companies. So I think one could relate, and I think it's also important, and the purpose of this, I would say, seminar is that since we are a kind of independent institution, yes, we are KTH, but we don't have a political purpose in the sense that we're going to get fired if we say something wrong. So I encourage everybody to, maybe I will, but I encourage everybody to steer up discussions, really talk about things the way they are, and we can use this opportunity to think about not only how to change the city, how to affect the process of development, but how also to, as you guys were saying, how do we change our profession? How do we change the purpose of our profession? How do we empower both society and also ourselves to become creators of ourselves, not only kind of facilitators and just followers of what's already kind of set as a sort of normal pattern of living.
No. Basically, so much to say, but the thing is, I wanted to pick up on some of the three moments. No, it's wonderful. I mean, there is one issue that came to mind when Anna mentioned this issue, this relationship to the scale of the globe. The reason I ended up calling the event Political Equator, which is a series of critical debates that I brought into the border in the physical environment, is because I discovered that Tijuana San Diego is in the same corridor between the 30th to 35th degrees north parallel, connecting Tijuana San Diego with Ceuta and Melilla, which is a main Ceuta and Melilla, which is a main border from North Africa into Europe, the main funnel of migration, and the Israeli-Palestinian border as well. All of these very, very contested geographies of conflicts are in the same corridor. So I called it the political equator. But
that drawing was exhibited in the Museum of Architecture that I was curating.
Oh, really?
Your drawing.
You have to tell me more about that. I didn't know that. So anyway, but the point is that it's the correspondences, right, between the global and the local. Also, that Juan mentioned earlier. I mean, when you are working in such a small scale, you are really implicitly already dealing with that other scale. Another thing about what Juan mentioned in the context of answers is that not only we are trained to really solve problems, and those problems, the solutions are always worse than the problems, but we are not looking at the right places. And I think that embedded in the reality, in the kind of drama of those other sides of intervention that we have not considered, as architects, we can begin to reorganize our own knowledge. I'm interested in that because as, again, Dubai and whatever, from the Arab Emirates to China, these cities were exploding. Can anybody of you tell me one idea that was advanced in those environments in terms of addressing the problems that we are kind of putting on the table in this discussion? How to engage informality, how to engage the mutation of the city, how to engage issues of migration, the politics of surveillance, the kind of unprecedented socioeconomic inequality. Those are the problems of the contemporary city. So tell me one idea that was advanced there. No, I don't think of any. The ideas that were advanced were in Latin America. I don't want to flag, how to say, like the parade the Latin American flag. But in Latin America, while we were so seduced to those other environments, is where there was truly a political transformation. From Brazil in Porto Alegre to Curitiba to Bogota to Medellin most recently, in this transference of knowledge, as in fact governments began to restructure themselves through a very different imagination, looking for material somewhere else. And of course the story, hopefully you already know it, but I'm mentioning it is because many of those projects were possible not only by architecture, but by the fundamental reorganization of the political structures. Yep. And the people who made it possible, guess what? They were not professional politicians. They were like us, architects, humanities-based people, coming from mathematics, from philosophy, who had the capacity for critical and relational thinking to begin to puncture into the homogeneity and the kind of backwardness of political systems as they were. You see what I'm trying to say? So I think that it is about knowledge, and I think a new type of knowledge. And finally, that's the point I wanted to make, because I don't know, I mean, my desire right now, probably as all of us, is how to enter into those models of knowledge transfer. Because what is vital to activist practices is really almost like a less egocentric role of the architect, but more by the capacity to share those knowledges, which really begin to kind of transform our notion of social justice, by the way, because the first world tends to patronize the third by just thinking that social justice is about the redistribution of resources, which it should be, but it's also about the redistribution of knowledges. And I think that's what has happened in Latin America, and I want to invest my practice in models of urban pedagogy, primarily with the American public, believe me. I know that here maybe there might be another debate, but at this moment the crisis in the United States is a crisis of a kind of absence of the public in terms of levels of awareness. So pedagogical models were the ones that founded the transformations in Medellin and Bogota. Without bringing awareness to the public, we cannot imagine or reimagine infrastructure, which is what you are really working on here.
Yeah. Do we have any questions from you, the audience again? We shouldn't linger too long. Well, maybe we could just bring the questions back to Stockholm again a little bit, like Bojan was trying to do as well, but also maybe talk a little bit about this, what I understand as a third position of the architect that you were talking about, and that relationship we have with the imagery, or the imagery of the city. We have seen, we were talking about the deceiving idea of participation, but you could also talk about imagery, like you use, like for instance, Juan, he's showing these outskirts of Madrid as something all bad, almost. or this being, you know, urban waste. We have this same discussion here with like, for instance, the towns, the post-war towns that were part of towns that were built outside the city, and this kind of very uplifting of the inner city as something all good. And it's also kind of the vibrant space that was the inner city that is used as the image of the good city of the future. And so on. I don't know, could you also talk about a kind of technique to put yourself without, you know, you are falling into the trap of using the same images again and again? Do you get a little bit? Yeah.
I would be happy just to make a short comment on that, because I think it might be hard for Juan and Teddy to contextualize some of that question. But I think there are, I mean, again, we tend in Sweden to, you know, think we are so remotely different. Of course, when we look at it from the outside, apparently it's of course not the same reality or situation or conditions as in Tijuana or even in Spain. But let's look closely at the whole sort of discourse around suburbs, the suburbs of the 60s and the 70s. One of the key words is integration. And integration is not about actually giving these people a real part in this community or in the society. It's actually integration is be alike, assimilate yourself. Let's make a makeover of the suburb and let's assimilate you. And if you smell garlic and look different, you are not assimilated. So let's look closely to our own backyards. The rhetorics, the tools are exactly the same. And I would like to say, in Sweden, they are even worse because they are so refined, so subtle, so we can't see them. They are not in our face as in Tijuana. But here, exactly the same processes happen of segregation. As soon as a very strong report or something brings up the real issues, why things happen in Rosengården, why things happen in Hisingen, why things happen in the suburbs in Stockholm, put a lid on. Let's talk about assimilation. Foreigners need to become entrepreneurs. It's the same as in cultural practices. We need all to become entrepreneurs. So let's look closely to home with the same eyes we look at the rest of the world. And I think your drawing that actually I exhibited in the Museum of Architecture about the meridian, the rounds between Tijuana, is not only touching the border between the Gibraltar Strait between Spain and Morocco, Spain and Africa, it's also touching other points in the world that are also, but we could draw many lines that touch similar issues and create this completely rhizomic map of where similar struggles are happening all parallel in the world.
I have another very strong image in my head from a student project we made a couple of years ago. It's a suburb, Fittja. We went there. It has a traditional, it's a quiet place. And beside this image, there is an image of a small, small village in Turkey that became a big city. And the name of the city is Kulu. And the city is completely staged or managed by the people living there. And these people send their money. They're actually from Sweden. So these are Turks living in Fittja and other suburbs like Fittja. And they are sending their money to Turkey. And they are also spending their money building up a city in Turkey. So this village has transformed in 20 years or 30 years to something completely different. So this is a very strong image for me because it says a lot about the possibilities of change here that we lost. And the change was somewhere else in another part of the world. So when we talk about infrastructure or economy, you know, we have it all here. It's just that we don't have the eyes to see it or the power to unleash. I'm very interested in the you were talking about the visualization of conflict. So for me, this is the lack of that. You know, you go there and you don't understand. If you don't know the background, you wouldn't understand. You know, you would just see these Turks looking the way they do, and you know. But so there is, I think what Sweden is going through right now is a lack of these images. We need them. We need to see the conflict, but we don't. So it's very important, I think. It's very interesting.
Are you awake? Good, good, good. That was intentional. That was intentional. No, you know, it's amazing. I recently was part of a blog, and I'm really bad at writing. Like you know, I write like a post-war reporter like this. But in the blog, we were just talking about these issues in general, and I tend to use some of this problematic language, right? Intrapreneurship. How would you call it? You know, any term that might really seem, let's say, the language of the enemy, as somebody mentioned in the blog. And I said, the problem is that you're using the same language as the corporations and this and that. And I really got upset because, again, I've been realizing that we are so caught up with this dangerous way of using certain language that we tend to forget the operative dimension of that language. And I had to kind of research a little bit of an article that I read years ago. In this guy criticizing academia, okay, saying all the terms that were so essential to the left in terms of theoretical, the construction of theories in the 80s, all the terms, hybridity, self-organizing systems, much of this rhizomatic, all this language was co-opted, he said, by digital capitalism. And what happened to all these theories that were in the academia? They only served to become metaphorical tropes, to be exhibited inside the gallery, or to become self-referential canonical language that only those theories could understand. They were never deployed out there. Who deployed them? Capitalism. So I'm not afraid of retaking those terms. I'm not afraid of using entrepreneurship to benefit the community. I'm not afraid of using, you know what I'm trying to say? Because from the left, and I saw it in the Occupy Wall Street recently, we tend to throw the baby with the bathwater, as they say. We want to obliterate the institutions and begin anew because they're fucked, right? And what is it what we do? We eliminate, in so doing, all the traces, institutional traces that open moments of transformation. You see what I'm trying to say? I'm interested in the kind of forensics of that institutional transformation to be the urban editors. I'm sure embedded in your own housing policy, there are very sophisticated concepts that can be recuperated, that have been camouflaged and hidden by these agendas recently. In the United States, there are community trusts, there are so many regulations that we could retake. So I'm interested in a project that really gets deep at those histories without being afraid of sounding this or that way, until we have to make that language operational, not only symbolic. You know what I mean? I'm looking at you. I'm not responding. I'm just saying in general. This is what you know. Basically, the image you were talking about, right? When I did that image of the little confetti, I wanted to use the land use, the actual land use image. But when the city council member that I showed it to, when they saw it in a meeting that we had, the politician and the community activist I work with, he was blown away. He understood finally something. You know what I mean? So images are political tools, obviously, but we have to use the techniques of the other. Otherwise, we are in our own world without affecting, you know, that. Sorry.
I just want to mention something from today's Metro. It's a newspaper. It's a free newspaper for those who don't know. It's news about SL kicking out businesses from Hornstull. I think it's Hornstull station because they don't fit the image, the future image of the city. So they want to attract, they want to have the more established type of companies in this location. So maybe this is a kind of way also that institutions you're using are in real life today or yesterday. This kind of language, but also process or policy.
sorry, it's just it opens up, what are the tools, basically? That's what I'm saying. What are the tools to visualize these conflicts or really enable a different awareness, right, of visualizing those dynamics? And probably it's about retrofitting the existing devices. The devices of the institution can be. I took a group of students in San Diego to some of the marginal neighborhoods with the official land use map of the municipality, just to prove the municipality wrong, because it only had 3 colors. When we were walking parcel by parcel, we began to fill in all the illegal uses. We came up at least with 8 more colors. So, this sort of conflict between the visible and the invisible. So, what are the tools, right?
I think your point is really good, because I think in Sweden we are at the moment seeing what happens when the traditionally right conservative party has co-opted the rhetoric of the sort of labor social democratic party. And it's very interesting, it's very similar. They are the New Workers' Party, they use a lot of the language. We have a prime minister that even is a feminist, or anyway. It's really true, and I think one in architecture practice, the best example is the co-opting of capitalism or sustainability. And I think your image with the car and the solar panels is very strong. But I think for us working in studying, practicing, it can be tricky sometimes, because sustainability has become a kind of post-political project. So for a lot of architects today, they think when they talk about sustainability, if we look at Stockholm, it's very much about a project that goes beyond politics. But actually, sustainability is really something highly ideological. Your attitude towards sustainability can range from the left to the right. I mean, you can be Norman Foster and make a very energy efficient skyscraper and sustain the way of living. Or you can start questioning and say, a micro water basin, as you were showing in Tijuana, or the water democracies in India, actually the real necessity for a green development, or the examples of Medellin or in Curitiba. So I think it's really important in our practice to see that it's actually how things operate, and I suppose that's what you were saying, Juan, more about change the way we look at things and less kind of get hooked up on terminology, or are we architects, are we planners, and more try to sort of understand the conditions and the mechanisms that are happening. You were talking about tools. I mean, we can talk about many things. But I think that's really important, your point about the co-opting of, because the architects, we are sometimes thinking that we are quite neutral in the way we operate. We've just been asked to do something, and we are not aware that just drawing a line is a kind of political act.
Can I just have one last thought? Just to, because this might help in your seminar for a moment, I hope. I don't want to sound pretentious. But I remember recently